If you're wondering about how to configure a CSR1000v in the SD-WAN Fabric, we're going to dive in and make it happen right now. What you see right here is our graphical user environment, and what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and onboard a C-Edge. Now, if we take a look at the topology, we'll see that C-Edge 40 is sitting here, and if I were to click on C-Edge 40 and access its console, what we would find is that this device is starting from scratch. And what I want to call your attention to is that this, if I do a show version, we'll just do an EN show version. What we're going to find is this device is actually running the Amsterdam version of the operating system. So this is going to be 17.3.1a. This is a very interesting operating system because it has two functional modes. If I come in and say show run or show version, and I say pipe include mode, what we're going to find is that the device actually has a mode of autonomous mode. Well, autonomous mode translates to the fact that this is just a regular CSR1000v. If I want to add this device to my SD-WAN Fabric, I need to change its mode from autonomous mode to controller mode. But before we do that, what I want to do is I want to leverage some of the more interesting capabilities inside of the vManage. Specifically, what I want to do is I want to go through the process of how we're going to onboard this device as an SD-WAN resource without a PMP server, without using something like the ZTP host that we looked at previously. What I really want to do is I want to go ahead and get this device onboarded, and I want to take the path of least resistance. Once we've done this, I'll actually show you another way that you can do this that's going to be very similar to what we did with the vEdges. Now, the way this is actually going to work is I need to make certain that this box can actually reach the other resources. To do so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go config T, I'm going to go to interface gigabit Ethernet 2, and I'm going to give it an IP address. The IP address for this box is going to be 100.100.100.40 255.255.255.0. I'm going to say no shut. And then I'm going to give it a default route. I'm going to say IP route to quad 0. Send it to 100.100.100.1, which is the gateway of last resort for this Ethernet segment that we're working with called Internet. So now what I want to do is I want to see, can I ping my gateway? 10.100.100.1, and I can. Can I ping my vManage? .2, and I can. Can I ping .3, which is my vBond? Can I ping at least one vSmart? We'll take 4. So we've got all the reachability that we need to allow this device to communicate to our controllers and simultaneously allow the controllers to communicate to it. It is just not in an operational state that's going to be ready to receive config. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to go into the vManage, and what I want to do is I want to call your attention to the fact that I have created a template. Yes, I kind of cheated. I have created a feature template. I know we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about templates. I've only kind of alluded to them. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you this process whereby I can use a template to onboard a device and make things happen much, much faster for me as the administrator before I try to pitch you on the benefits of actually creating and learning to use templates. We will have an entire video series devoted just to the idea of the different types, flavors, and functions of templates. All I want you guys to understand is that to do what I'm getting ready to do, I need a template. And using this template is going to allow me to facilitate deployment and onboarding of devices like my C-Edges, that include CSR1000Vs, ISRVs, and other resources that we're going to have in our infrastructure, like, say, for instance, the Catalyst 8000V. With that being said, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and apply this template to a C-Edge device in a very similar fashion to what we did with the vEdges. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to C-Edge 40, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the 3 dots to the side here, and I'm going to go ahead and attach a device. And what I'm going to be presented with is a list of nondescript CSR chassis numbers. aka serial numbers. I'm going to go ahead and pick the very first one in the list. I'm going to say I want to associate this template with that device, and I'm going to go ahead and say attach, and it's going to ask me to provide some of the basic information. I'm going to hit the three dots here. I'm going to edit the template, and I'm going to tell it that it's going to have a system IP of 255.255.40. It's going to have a site ID of site 40, and it's going to have a host name of CEdge 40. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say update, and what the system is going to do when I hit next and configure devices, it's actually going to associate that specific chassis number with this specific template. We see here, if I hit the down arrow, the association has taken place. Now we're not done yet. What I want to do now is I'm going to go back into devices, and from devices, what I want to do is I want to find that resource. I'm going to go ahead and hit device model until I reorganize everything into blocks of devices. So CSR1000v. Notice this guy right here is vManaged. This is the CSR that I just associated with or attached to that template. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the three dots here. And from here, I'm going to say I want to generate a bootstrap configuration. Now, I'm going to specifically tell it to use cloud init config. Encoded string would be, as an example, if I was doing something inside of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Cloud init is going to be for AWS, for Microsoft Azure, for VMware. I'm going to uncheck the include default certificate. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say OK. And it's going to give me the option to download a configuration file. I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to download it, and that's going to save it to my local disk. Now, what I want to do next is I want to actually leverage this file so that I could use it. Now, in the real world, if I had a physical device, like a ASR or an ISR, what I would do is I would actually put this file on a USB thumb drive, and I would give this file a very specific name, because it's going to be the name that the device that is going to be onboarded is going to look for when it brings itself up. And that's going to be the name that I'm going to assign this particular file. And what we're going to do is we're going to move this file down towards the CSR1000v. So to make that happen, I'm going to go into the command line. I'm going to type ls, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to find that configuration file. Now, this configuration file can be named in a number of ways. I'm just going to go ahead and rename it here. So I'm going to say I want to move CSR, that long name, as far as the config. And what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and call this Cisco SDWAN _ cloud _ init.cfg. And what this is the name that the router is going to look for when it boots up. In other words, it's going to look to see if that configuration file exists, and if it does, it's actually going to add that configuration to its operational parameters. Now, what I want to do now is I need to get this file as well as my SD-WAN PIM file installed in the boot flash of my CEdge 40 router. Now, to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say copy SCP to boot flash. The IP address of my server is 100.100.100.2254. The username is user. The source file is going to be located in home/user/downloads. And it's going to be Cisco SDWAN _ cloud _ init.cfg. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. The name of it will match what I said, and the password is going to be test123 with a capital T. So capital T, lowercase est, 123, and that should transfer that file. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer the sdwan.pim file. So to the same host, user, And in this instance, it's going to be home, user, downloads, sdwan.pim. Password, test123 with a capital T. So now if I type directory for my boot flash, what I'm going to see is I'm going to see the SD-WAN PIM file, and I'm going to see the Cisco SD-WAN _ cloud init file. Now, this process that I'm getting ready to go through is going to take a little bit of time. So I kind of want to stage it before I actually run it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the graphical user environment so that we can see both the GUI, the graphical user, as well as the CLI screen that we see here of this specific device. And then what we're going to do is we're going to simply change the operational mode. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go into the graphical user environment. I'm going to just double click on this. And what we see here, this is the guy that we're trying to onboard. The next portion of this is where I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say control or mode enable. Hit enter. I'll go ahead and say confirm. And what we're going to do now is we're going to wait to see what happens. Now, it'll take a little bit of time for this to actually come up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break the video up as it progresses. But we can see here that the router itself is moving into controller mode. In other words, it's going to need to reboot. It's going to load back up, run its operating system, do everything that it would do as if it was just a normal turn up. But bear in mind, we're switching operating systems. What we're doing is we're moving from IOS-XE for CSR to IOS-XE SD-WAN as an operating system. The configuration file will already be on the device. The device will read it, and the device will actually add that configuration to its running config. And then what will end up happening is it'll communicate to the vBond. Authentication will take place. It'll determine whether or not if it's been whitelisted or not. If it has been whitelisted, what we'll do is we'll see this little icon right here change from what we see here, which is that little cloud. It's going to change to a CSR for the certificate signature request. And then ultimately it should transition all the way out to the little green success ribbon that we've all come to expect. So let's go ahead and just let this thing do its magic. System booted in controller mode. All right, it's been about a minute and we can see that the device is coming up. Startup config is present. Trust points are being brought in. SSH, and we see the Yang infra is coming up as it's trying to communicate with the controllers, and the controllers will be communicating with it. Next thing we should start seeing is some OMP daemons fire. Notice my tunnels have come up. There is my OMP daemon. We see that we have brought up our configuration to the database infrastructure. The controllers now should have access to this device. Notice the device knows about its identity, CEdge40. We should see some additional output regarding OMP shortly. OMP just came up as far as its operational state. Here very soon, we should see a transition in the graphical user environment that moves to CSR. It'll be a green circle with white letters inside of it. The device is receiving its configuration. Actually, it's accepting its configuration. The install CSR message just left, just fired. Shortly over here, we should see a transition to CSR. Once the certificate is signed and the device takes its full configuration, accepts its system IP, the graphical user environment will ultimately refresh until such time that we see the green ribbon that tells us the device has been successfully onboarded. So this is a very predictable and orchestrated mechanism that we can actually verify organically as it takes place in the background by just simply looking at the device that's being onboarded when it's a C-edge. When it's a V-edge, it's not quite as easy to ascertain what's taking place in the infrastructure, but ultimately, this device will add itself to the fabric, will verify the configuration as far as the number of OMP peers that have formed, as well as taking a look at the control connections. About a minute has passed, and we can see that the CSR has actually been signed. It has been registered. It should now be part of my infrastructure. So now if I say admin to log into this device, it has its name. And if I do a config dash or space T, we'll notice that that command is not supported. Why? Because this device is actually operating in the IOS-XE SD-WAN mode, and we can see that we just formed our peering to our 2v smarts. Remember, we have 3. We'll form peerings with up to 2. By default, I'll say show SD-WAN OMP peers, and we can see that we should have peering with 2v smarts, vsmart 2, and vsmart 3 specifically. And this basically tells me everything's good to go. I'll finalize that by saying show SD-WAN control connections. And I want to make certain that this box does indeed have its configuration. So control connections, sorry. And we should have peering with 2v smarts and the vManage. So this illustrates one of the easiest ways I know of to onboard a C-edge device. It makes everything simple, reduces the requirement to understand or to remember the configuration constraints as far as assigning IP addresses, tunnels, tunnel modes, SD-WAN configuration, and all of those things I'm going to be showing you shortly. But just keep in mind that, this is the way that it was intended to be done. There are obviously other ways, and a lot of instructors teach the long, more protracted method that we have had long before, back into the early days of 16 code of the iOS, back when there was a specific CSR for IOS-XE and then a specific CSR image for IOS-XE SD-WAN. Now they've been combined since the latter portion of 16 code, and to me, it's something that I've really come to rely on and trust, because it does indeed make things much simpler to configure. And this is only one way to onboard a CSR1000v, but I think it's the coolest. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at the manual method, the longer method, in the next portion of this video. The following method is by far my least favorite method for deploying devices, but it is the way that we used to have to do things in the earlier versions of Cisco viptela SD-WAN. So what I want to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and dive into onboarding CEdge50. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a connection to CEdge50 and illustrate that I'm not in the proper version to deploy this device. I'm going to say show version pipe include mode, and we'll see that I'm in autonomous mode. And we know that we need to be in controller mode in order for this to work, controller enable mode for this to work. So what I want to do right now, before I change the state, before I do anything, I'm going to go ahead and make certain that I get my sdwan.pim file installed on this device, because after I put it in controller mode, sometimes that can be problematic. So let's go ahead and get that knocked out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say copy scp to boot flash. And what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to specify 100.100.100.254. User is the username. The source file is going to be in home. User. Downloads. It's going to be sdwan.pim. The password is test123 with a capital T. And I have moved it over. Sorry, directory. So here is the file. and it actually has a size. There's a documented problem with moving some of the files over. Sometimes it says it moved, but there's no file size change. So the next thing that I need to do is to change the mode of this device. Controller, mode, enable. We have to wait for the device to reload and make itself available to us. We can see the boxes come back up in controller mode. We're just waiting for it to make its final post. All right, it's been about 4 minutes, and the box is just now starting to come up to get into the position where I'm going to be able to make some config. Okay, I'm going to try to log in now. All right, so the box is now asking me to enter a new password. I'll pick admin again. And now what we'll find is config. If I do en and I type config t, it's not going to accept the command because now it is in controller enabled mode. Show version pipe include mode, and we see it is in controller managed mode. Now what I've got to do is I've got to make the configurations necessary to allow this device to work in conjunction with the vManage. Now to do that, it's going to be config transaction is going to be the keyword. I'm going to go to my system, and just like I did my controllers and my vEdges, I need to tell it everything that needs to function in the system to begin with the system -IP, and that's going to be 172.255.255. I'm going to make this one 51 and the other one will be 52. So site 50 router 1, site 50 router 2. The other thing that I'm also going to need to do is specify my site ID, which is going to be 50. My organizational name is going to be SDWAN Advanced-Lab. The vBond is going to be located at vbond.micronicslab.com. Inside of the CSRs, I cannot use the host-name function. Host-name does not work. It needs to be specified inside of the standard config, and it's going to be host name like it's always been, so no dash. So in this instance, it's going to be host name edge 50. Note that nothing has appeared on the screen because now I have to use the commit in order to be able to deploy the configuration settings. Now, what I've done is I've set up my system configuration, but I've also now got to set up my interface configuration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my one and only interface that I need to worry about right now, which is going to be interface gigabit Ethernet 2, and I'm going to go ahead and assign it an IP address. I'm going to say no shut. IP address will be 100.100.50.255.255.255.0. I am going to exit, and I'm going to go ahead and provide the IP route of 000.000. That will be 100, 100, 100.1. So that's my default route out in my primary VRF, and I'm going to say my IP name server is going to be 172.16.100.100, and then I'll say commit here. This should give me the basic functionality as far as reachability, same as we've done in every lab. So if I come over now and say ping my gateway 100, 100, 100.1, I've got reachability ping 100, 100, 100.2. That should be my vManage, and I've got reachability to it. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and install the root CA. So directory, I'm hoping that my SDWAN.pim file is intact, and it is. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say request platform software SD-WAN root cert chain install, and that's going to be boot flash, called it SDWAN.pim. Let's see if we can get that to install. Okay, it is installed. Let's verify that it's installed. So to verify its installation, I'm going to say show SDWAN certificate root CA cert pipe include SDWAN, and let's see if we see the certificate file that we've implemented, just like we did on the edges, and we see it. It's here. And like I said, to me, this just seems so cumbersome compared to the other way of handling our implementation. Now, the next part of this is that I need to create a tunnel. So config transaction, I'm going to create an interface tunnel. This interface tunnel, we'll say interface tunnel. I'm going to call it tunnel 2 because it's going to be on gigabit Ethernet 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say no shut. I'm going to say IP unnumbered. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the gigabit Ethernet. And this is very, very case sensitive. Ethernet 2, say tunnel source gigabit Ethernet 2. And I need to specify a tunnel mode, and that tunnel mode is going to be SD-WAN. This is the way that we're going to be creating our tunnel operation. So that'll be my IPsec tunnels as well as my DTLS tunnels that we're going to be needing to get our infrastructure up and running. Now, what I'm going to do, now if I type commit, let's see what happens. So I'll say show run interface tunnel 2. There we go. So IP unnumbered, tunnel source, tunnel mode, SD-WAN. And if I do a show run interface gigabit Ethernet 2, we see that we have the IP address. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and see if I can't configure the SD-WAN portion. So I'll say config transaction SD-WAN interface gigabit Ethernet 2. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say tunnel interface encapsulation will be IPsec. My color in this case will be business internet, and we'll talk about that when we get into the conversation about our design. I'm going to say exit, exit, and then now what I'm going to do is exit one more time, and I'll say commit. And I'm hoping that this is going to give me everything that I need, and I should see my tunnel state come up. We will say show IP interface brief, and let's see what we have. Notice that I have a tunnel 2. Notice it took its IP address from gigabit 2, and right now we should be able to go ahead and get this device onboarded. Now, to onboard this device, I need to go into the jump box. And from the jump box perspective, I'm going to select a device in my list. So I'll just go ahead and take this one right here. All of this. Copy. What I'm going to do now is I will say SSH to admin at, and I will say 100. 100, 150. Let's see if it lets me in. If it doesn't, we know that we've got a problem with regard to the tunnel. So I need to allow SSH daemon. So I'll go ahead and hit C here, and let's get that in so that I can do a copy paste real quick. So we'll get rid of all of this. I'll say config transaction. SD-WAN interface gigabit Ethernet 2 tunnel interface allow service. I'll just say all. Commit config transaction line VTY 0 to 4 transport input SSH, but the commit should. So now let me try my SSH. So let's go ahead and see if we can't get this to work. So I'll say request platform software SD-WAN vEdge cloud activate chassis number And then I need that chassis number. And I need the token, just like we did when we were working with the V-edges. So I'll just grab the token next. Copy. Let's go ahead and get that pasted in. And let's hit enter. And hopefully we'll be able to see some magic happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize this so that I can watch what's happening here. And hopefully we'll see some progress. CSR went in. You can see it right here. Next thing, it should come back signed. And then the device will be added to the fabric. Since we are logged in via VTY, via SSH, I could do a terminal monitor. And that'll actually start showing the output on the screen here. Until you do that, you can see it by looking at the log file. There it goes. So certificate's been installed. So that certificate has been signed. Control connections are now coming up. vSmarts. Everything's going live now. So I'll just hit tab, hit enter, and we should see now that at least we have the two vSmarts, the vBond, and the vManage. As far as the way this goes, we're connecting to vSmart 1 and vSmart 3, vManage 13, which is vManage 3, and the vBond that we're connecting to. Notice it's saying here, it used to be 100.101.3. So that's going to be the second vBond, the one that is not part of Site 255. So this should come up. So one last check, I'll say show SD-WAN OMP peers. And we should see that we have two adjacencies with our vSmarts. This is a good place to stop because in the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to onboard an ISRV and a CAT 8000v just to demonstrate the process. And you're going to find it's going to mirror what we did with the CSR in the first part of this lab. Understand what I just demonstrated is what I call the long way, and it was the way that we used to have to do things, and it was very, very manual, and it also required a lot of configuration, balancing the tunnels, typing stuff in. I really have come to appreciate using the template to do the implementation, because now that this device has been onboarded, I still have to create a template for it if I want to be able to manage it the way that it would be managed in a actual real-world SD-WAN environment. So we're not gaining any ground, or we're not minimizing our effort. In fact, we're actually increasing our effort by not going ahead and doing it the way that I illustrated it in the first part of this video, but I wanted you to see both ways. All right? So I'm going to go ahead and end here, and I'll see you guys in the next video when we're going to talk about some of the other C-Edge devices. And then I'm going to give you that conversation, that lecture I've been describing about templates.